Chapter 4 of the book, Families and Educators Together, Building Great Relationships that Support Young Children. And in the previous chapters, we have really dug deep into what family engagement is, the role that you'll play, and how to get families to be decision makers in the process, in part of the school. Now we're going to be discussing communicating with families, and communication is key. If you don't have good communication, it will be very challenging to build those relationships. And so communicating with families, it includes exchanging information using verbal and nonverbal and written methods. True communication happens when information is both sent and received. The second principle of NAEYC states, teachers and programs engage families in two-way communication. Strategies allow for both school and family-initiated communication that is timely and continuous. Communication takes multiple forms and reflects each family's language preference. These relationships rely on clear, honest, reciprocal communication, a key component of effective family engagement for any school and program. Open, respectful, positive, two-way communication with families makes it possible for them to share their hopes, dreams, and concerns for their children and to determine how they want to engage in their child's learning and development. But there are some barriers to effective communication. There are many factors that affect the sending and receiving of communication, such as language, similarities and differences, cultural traditions, dialects and regional nuances of meaning, personal communication styles. Differences in any of these can act as barriers to support or supports for communication with others. You can learn information and practice strategies to overcome these barriers, use supports, and create a mutual connection between yourself and the children's families. Create a plan for communication. You want to create a plan for communication with families that considers and reflects on the goals and practices of the program's overall family engagement system. When communication is planned, intentional, considerate, and inclusive, family engagement can blossom. The following steps to create a family communication plan should be considered. Establish goals and objectives in line with the program's overall family engagement system. Identify the types of and recipients of information to be exchanged. Determine how to invite and use information shared by families. Choose family communication formats and strategies. Consider ways to support diverse families. Ensure family-teacher communications are reciprocal. Address communication challenges. Explain emergency preparedness policies and procedures. Address frequency and quantity of information shared by teachers. And schedule periodic evaluations. It's important to think about how you are going to communicate with families. Often I have a first paper that's welcoming families to the center. There's newsletters. My school has used Remind, Facebook, email, Story Park. We just keep trying new ways to reach our families to make sure that we are meeting their needs of communication. Establishing goals and objectives. So just so that you know, most of the presentation going forward, we'll be digging in deep into the 10 strategies given for a communication plan. And this one happens to be establishing goals and objectives. And when you do that, you want to make sure you plan for your own communication as part of that overall system. And that as you are sending things out, you want to make sure that it is in a timely way so that perhaps they are not receiving a bill, a tuition bill, or a health form, or a request for contact information from other parts of your program. Your information might get lost, or it might just be an overload for them. So you want to be careful. The interactions between you and the family members are the foundation for family engagement. Communication also involves the connections you make with your community, interactions with colleagues, and what you do to enhance communication between families and others and with the members of your community. Pay particular interest to communication pathways in your book and look at that cycle. We've talked so much already about cycles, and this is just another one of them, and how important everything is connected. Identify the types and the recipients of information. Ensure that family gets the information they require and that they respond to provide the information you need. So it is that back and forth exchange. Sharing sensitive information such as like health forms or financial information. You want to carefully select the communication venue. Make sure that you're sending it through the right way. Your choice of venue will depend on the family's needs and circumstances and the urgency of the message. You want to think about cell phone policies. This is one reason why many programs ask family members not to use their phones during drop-off or pickup time. That way that communication can still happen face-to-face, which we know is one of the best ways. The person on the other end of the phone of the conversation might also overhear some confidential information or interactions with children that we don't want them to be hearing. It might be helpful to have brochures about coping with family difficulties. So you want to make sure that those handouts are brief and important, and that send home handouts with information about the kinds of services that are available in your community so that you can help them out in a very respectful and confidential information in a confidential way. You want to provide information more than once because let's face it, we all get a lot of stuff and we sometimes might lose it. So how can you provide that information more than one time? And then more than one kind of media as well. Permission for photos to be published are extremely important, especially today in our times of confidentiality. We want to make sure that we are protecting everyone. So make sure you have that handwritten permission from a parent or guardian before you post those pictures. How to invite and use information shared. Some ways of being a family may be familiar to you and others may be new or surprising to you. No matter who is part of a child's family, you can be sure that that child is precious to that family. When interacting with families, it is always best to approach with an open mind and an understanding heart. How might a family's situation, both past and present, influence their relationships with their child? You want to keep an open mind to that. And how will that relationship be with you or their child's learning? Be vigilant. However, about not judging, you want to make sure you're not judging families or assuming that because a family has certain experiences, the child will behave or learn in a particular way. Families and children are unique, so it's important to get to know what their funds of knowledge are. And if funds of knowledge about the child's development and health and home life and experiences, all the things that make the child who the child is. A scrapbook of story of the child's life might be less formal, or video clips on the phone. Those are all great ways of understanding the funds of knowledge. After families have shared information with you, ask, how might I use it to modify or individualize the program so children are successful learners? Family communication formats and strategies. Avoid communication biases. You can learn appropriate ways to interact with people from diverse backgrounds. Some examples are using person-first language. For example, child with a disability rather than a handicapped child. Use everyday language and avoid using slang or nicknames. Use gender-neutral language when possible. Treat everyone with respect and listen patiently. If language is a barrier, consider using a translator, translation app, or phone translation service. Producing information in lengthy written form is kind of a bias. Keep critical information in the handbook, but also send it to the families in short bits using emails, text messages, video clips, or other methods that work for families. Above all, make sure that the number of positive messages families receive always outnumber the negative messages. Photo-based activity. Here's another one where I'm going to have you reflect on this activity. You are a director of a NACCE center serving infants through preschool. Your task is communicating with families and providing access information about their children and child development. Most families are hungry for information about their children's daily activities and experiences. Exchanging information at drop-off and pickup times is helpful up to a point. However, this does not address the family's needs to know that their child is growing completely. What would you do? How would you solve this situation? Some contact is happening, but they're thirsty for more. They want to know more. What would you do? Pause this and then go ahead and think on it and then resume. Plan ways to support diverse families. Engaging families might be simple if you had a roadmap showing exactly how to interact with each family based on clarity, identifiable cultural norms or practices. What makes your work challenging, however, is that no two families are alike. Each family's beliefs and practices are influenced by a complex interplay of traits and factors. This section of the chapter talks about the aspects of diversity you might encounter and preparing materials for families with diverse languages. So it's important to make sure that you have ability to translate your materials into the different languages of the families that are coming. And that on page 68 of your textbook, there are guidelines that are offered to you on some things you can do to help with those diverse learners. For example, saying less, simplifying your work, say what you mean exactly. So take a look at that because those will all be great strategies for you to be able to implement right away. Family-teacher communications are reciprocal. Family communication should emphasize the exchange of information, a process in which each member of the partnership shares and receives knowledge. So remember, again, it's not a one-way street. It is a two-way street. One step in establishing trusting two-way relationships with families is to ask them what they want to contribute and gain from their child's early learning setting. This is often an effective step that's overlooked. I often will do this. I set goals with my families when I meet them, and then again at family conferences. And then again, we have home visits and make those goals again and talk about the child's progress. And we really just want to make sure that we are working together as a partnership to make sure that we are meeting the goals and needs of that child. Getting to know families takes time, but investing in the process helps you respond more successfully to each family, addressing their needs and responding to their interests and appreciating their language and culture. Customized communication builds strong relationships and enhance your teaching as well. You want to make sure you keep careful records, that you are sensitive to the information from the family so you can build on what works and so what you can add and new methods that you can add. If you notice families are not participating, then making sure that you find a different way to connect with them. Anonymous ways to provide feedback. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Do you believe that anonymous ways of providing feedback are helpful? Or do you think that there should be a name attached to it? Think for a minute on that. How would you implement that? Would you implement that into your program? Family-teacher communication. Effective communication is reciprocal, so it builds your partnership. It builds on your partnership with the families and benefits everyone. Supporting parents' efforts to help their children develop during the preschool years improves child school readiness, reduces child behavior problems, enhances child's social skills, and promotes academic success. Teachers identify each child's abilities, needs, and interests to individualize the program so every child can develop and learn. You also want to think about the families. Families learn more about their child development, and educational experiences can apply this information when supporting their child's learning and development at home. That's that homeschool connection. So what they learn about their child, they can then apply this information at home and further their child's education and growth. And children benefit from an individualized environment, materials, curriculum, and instructions that result from this exchange of information. So you cannot underestimate the information, the communication that we receive from families, because it not only benefits you as a teacher, it benefits our families, and it benefits our children. Addressing communication challenges. One critical stumbling block is the sender's or receiver's misunderstanding of the goals and content of communication. So you want to make sure families understand that information you need and why you need it. You need to be transparent with that. If you look at the text box on page 70, what do I hope to learn? If you can use this as your guide, the purpose of communication and the receiver of communication. It is crucial to tailor expectations and strategies to meet the characteristics of each family. And communicating with families who are experiencing stress and trauma may require creative options. You can take advantage of opportunities to touch base at different times and using different methods. Again, referring back to phone calls, paper, emails, text messages, voice messages. They may all serve a purpose, and try to be creative in your ways of engaging families. Work with families to address concerns. Don't let them linger. Make sure that you are addressing them right away. Handle conflicts as they arise. We cannot read each other's minds. So often, these are due to the lack of understanding of background, language, or beliefs. There are generally two goals in dealing with conflict. You might focus on A, ending the disagreement, or B, preserving the relationship. In both cases, good communication is essential and will lead to a positive result. When the language, culture, and other characteristics of your community change, you may need to alter the policies, rules, and assumptions that were appropriate in the past. Establish which policies are necessary, which are in place just because, well, that's always the way it's been, and which may just be based on preferences or personal taste. This is where you can have those long discussions with your colleagues and administration and should be open enough to challenge each other on these policies. Maintaining only necessary rules and expectations is one way to reduce the possibilities of conflicts with families. The approach creates a more collaborative environment for communication that increases family engagement. Positive and mutually respectful relationships are more likely to result in cooperation than strict rules and consequences. Talking things out, listening to them, hopefully them listening to you, and thinking about why do you have the rules in place? Are they really because that's something that you personally like, or is it really what's best for the child and the family? You want to track communication and periodic evaluations. Track frequency and quantity of communication. Often this is an overlooked strategy to making sure that we are not inundating our families. So thinking about what is your system for tracking it? How do you know what information the family prefers? What information has been sent out and how did they respond? And what other information do you need? Often this just begins with a conversation around that. What is their preferred communication? And then tracking that. They may say that they like emails, but they never respond to it. but they actually respond to text better. So you need to track this information so that you can keep up with the families and not fall into, well, they said they preferred email, and well, then I'm going to keep going with it. Make sure that you are also scheduling periodic evaluations, thinking about what do families want to know, what do families want you to know, how do you want families to respond, how are families responding, how do families want you to respond, and how are you responding? These are all key questions that you are going to have to make sure you evaluate every so often to make sure that communication is flowing. And seek feedback from transitioning families. Do an exit interview from your families. Seeking that information will help you build your communication plan with current and future families. Holding successful family teacher conferences. And you noticed I said family. It is no longer okay to say parent teacher conferences, but family teacher conferences is more inclusive. So it's time to make those changes if you haven't. But when you hold a family conference, you want to make sure your schedule is flexible. Yes, we work certain hours. However, our families might be working those same hours, and it is not possible for them to get off of work. Some families get paid per hour, and then you're asking them to take time away, and they might not get paid, or they just can't get to your schedule. So be flexible. Offer several options, including daytime, evening, and weekend time slots. I know it's not convenient, but we only do them once or twice a year. That's the least we can do for our families. And thinking about the NAEYC Code, Principle 2.1, it states in there, we shall work to create a respectful environment for and a working relationship with all families, regardless of families' members' sex, race, national origin, immigrant status, preferred home language, religious belief or affiliation, age, marital status, family structure, disability, or sexual orientation. So I want you to remember that as we are planning these family conferences, and that you are being prepared for them. You want to make sure that if you need translation for things, you have a translator. If it's paperwork being translated, you need to have that done. So we need to make sure that we meet the needs of our families, whether it be grandparents, aunts, uncles, or siblings. We need to be prepared for that. You want to leave time for discussion. This isn't a time for us to just give them all of our knowledge, right? But it is a discussion. It's a conversation. You want to leave this time, arrange the space so teachers and family members can just sit side by side, plan and prepare ahead so that you can make the best use of the conference time. You want to make sure you respect cultural preferences and practices and the language spoken by the family, and encourage them to share their knowledge of their child. Remember, they are their child's first teacher and expert. You want to arrange the room and seating. I personally like to just sit in a circle. I don't really want a table in between us. I want it just to be like sitting around with friends and chatting. I mean, we both have the best vested interest of their child, and we want to make sure that we can see each other. You'll be collecting photos and observations, notes, checklists, work samples, and things to document the child's experience and progress, and possibly might even store that in a portfolio. If this is something that you do, then great, have that available already, but be prepared and organized ahead of time. You need to have some kind of a plan in place so that you're not just shuffling through everything. And make sure you start the conference with a positive example of the child's growth. Always close on a high note. The first principle of family engagement is programs invite families to participate in decision making and goal setting for their child. So this is from NAEYC, and you want to make sure that you are involving those families in that. And with the family conferences, when I just spoke of portfolios, these are things that can be put into them. And again, start on a high note, end on a high note. You want that sandwich approach. So if there's anything to be said, you want to make sure that anything that maybe is more challenging or difficult to talk about, you want to put it in between that. Also, this is not the first time that you should be discussing something with a family that might be problematic. You want to make sure that you've already addressed that before, and that at this point at a family conference, you are making a plan and putting it in place. Remember, bad news is not something that a family wants to hear, but sometimes we have to say difficult stuff to them. But again, a family conference should not be the first time they're hearing about this. You should already have developed a relationship and started sharing some strategies that you can learn from the family. It's time to reflect on your practices. So I want you to think about when you imagine the improvements in your work with families that can happen as a result of creating a communication plan, which is what this whole chapter was about. It's communicating with families. What specific areas of your work seem most likely to improve? I want you to think about that for a moment. And if you were to think about your weaknesses and strengths when it comes to communication, how will that impact families? Perhaps a family chooses a format or a form of communication that maybe it's one of your weaknesses. How are you going to overcome that? I know with new technology, sometimes that can be difficult for us to learn, and perhaps a family wants that form of communication. How will you work through that process?